So you got a big raise or promotion, and that means more money is going to be coming in. So what do? Are there tax issues to be concerned about? Should you change your budget? Should you change your investments? We're going to break it all down today. You don't want to miss today's episode. Hey everyone, this is John Boyd, host of the Emerging Wealth Podcast. Thanks for joining us and making us a part of your week. Before we dive in, if you're finding value in our content, please give us a like. This helps us reach more listeners and share quality financial education. Next, I'd recommend visiting our website at www.modernwealth.com. Head on over to our Learning Center. It's packed with videos and articles designed to help you optimize your wealth. While you're there, consider subscribing to our newsletter. Thanks again for being with us. Now let's dive into this week's episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Emerging Wealth Podcast. I appreciate you guys being here today. I got my big 140-pound Great Dane sleeping in my office with me today, so I just want to apologize in advance if you guys hear some loud snoring. It might sound like a grown man is sleeping in the back, but it's actually my dog. So for any Great Dane owners out there or big dog owners, you guys can, I'm sure, feel my pain. But super stoked that you guys are here because we got a good one for you. With it being the beginning of the year, it's generally the time where that salary bump you were owed from last year kicks in. And in some cases, those salary bumps are pretty darn big, especially if you got a promotion. So whether it's a situation where you got a promotion, change jobs, or heck, maybe you're just a business owner and business is booming and money is starting to really flow in, what should you do now that your cash flow has increased on account of all your hard work? So before we dive into any of the financial nuts and bolts on what you should do, I'm a big believer that the first thing that you should do after a big raise is enjoy it and celebrate. I'm not saying to go spend $90K on a new Audi or something like that, but you should absolutely do something to celebrate that financial milestone. It is so easy to get caught up in the grind of your career or business, and it's easy to not stop and think about what you've actually accomplished. Celebrating a raise with a night out, a little shopping trip, whatever you want to do to celebrate is incredibly important to get that little dopamine kick to the brain. Why work so hard to earn money and try to better your livelihood if you're not going to stop and smell the roses along the way? So now that you've hopefully have celebrated, now let's talk about what we should do financially. And the first thing we are going to do is sit down and look at what our financial goals are and how much closer we are to making them a reality. Now, when I say sit down and look at your financial goals, that isn't a figure of speech. You should quite literally be documenting what your financial goals are and understand them. So for example, if you are to ask a CEO of a company what that company's current year and long-term financial goals are, they not only have that all documented out, boom, 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 but they can tell you in depth what all those objectives are and goals are. You need to have that same mentality. And that's why I'm a big proponent of actually documenting what your financial goals are. So for example, for our clients at Modern Wealth, we have a project management system that tracks various tasks and goals. And in that system, we write down what our short-term and long-term goals are. So for example, a short-term goal could be something as simple as just simply building enough cash to cover an emergency cash reserve or funding a child's 529 account for the year. Then our long-term goals could be something like buying a new home or even something like retirement. But you get the idea. It's all documented out so that everyone in the family is on the same page. And so when someone gets a raise, it's very easy to look back at what our financial goals are and start checking things off the list and maybe even adding new goals to the list as part of this raise. So I would encourage you to take a similar approach. Obviously, you don't have to invest in a fancy task management software program to do this, But it really is just as simple as writing it down in the Notes app on your phone or on a piece of paper. And of course, if you're married, ensure that your partner is on the same page about these goals as you are. So now that you have reviewed your goals, hopefully you have an idea about how your raise and increase in cash flow helps you achieve them. While working towards financial goals is obviously exciting stuff, we don't want to get blindsided by taxes. Depending on how much your income has gone up, you may very well need to adjust your tax withholding, or in some cases, even utilize a quarterly tax payment program to ensure you don't run into hot water with the IRS. And why we need to do this in the first place is with more income, obviously that means more taxes. And with more taxes owed, you are at much higher risk of under withholding. As of the recording of this podcast, the IRS under withholding penalty is 8%. If you are not familiar with under withholding, there is an article that I wrote that breaks down what it is, and I will include it in the show notes. But in a nutshell, our tax system is a pay-as-you-earn system. The IRS generally does not like to be paid all the taxes owed from the year prior in April. They want you withholding, through payroll deductions or quarterly tax payments, 90% of your projected tax liability throughout the year, or 100% of the tax you owed in the previous year. If you make over 150K as a married couple or 75K filing separately, this amount is 110% instead of 100%. Now, the reason why this is all important to understand is because let's say you got a big raise and your tax withholding on your paychecks hasn't really changed much, and you withhold, let's say, 20K in federal taxes throughout the year. Now, let's say you go file your taxes and you should have been withholding, let's say, at least 32K. That's a 12K difference. And as of the recording of this episode, it's going to be subject to an 8% under withholding penalty, and that compounds daily. That's essentially $1,000 in penalties alone. So bottom line is, anytime you get a raise, you want to check what your withholding is on your paychecks to see if you are at risk of under withholding. Tools like the IRS tax withholding tool on the IRS website are great ways to gauge your estimated tax withholding for the year. For our folks who are tuning in who get RSUs, this impacts you as well because RSUs are considered a bonus, and bonuses have a flat 22% withheld for federal taxes in most cases. So if your effective tax rate is over 22%, the withholding on those RSUs isn't going to be enough and puts you at risk of facing under withholding penalties. Now, withholding enough is just one part of the equation. Obviously, if you simply want to reduce how much taxes you are paying in the first place, so you can keep more of that raise in your hard-earned income, this is where you're going to need to do a deep dive review of your overall tax plan. The strategies you deploy here from a tax planning perspective, whether those are charitable strategies, front-loading, itemized deductions, etc., are all going to vary from person to person. But it's crucial that you actually review your tax plan whenever your income goes up. So we've talked about reviewing financial goals and tax planning, and now it's time for everyone's favorite topic. Yep, you already guessed it. We're talking about budgeting. I know the topic of budgeting and just the word budget can probably feel like a wet pair of socks, but it's something you can't ignore. It can make a serious impact on your bottom line. So before we dive into what needs to happen with your budget after a raise, it's important that you have good data and information regarding your budget. Trying to manually put in what your estimated expenses are in a spreadsheet or using one of the free budgeting tools banks give you, I find that those are woefully ineffective ways of actually tracking how much you spend. That is why, if you haven't already, I would encourage you to pay for a legitimate budget app that can track all of your spending and categorize it on a daily basis. If you're a client of Modern Wealth, all of our clients get access to a budgeting app within our financial planning app, and that's how we track it. But for folks who are obviously not clients, apps like YNAB are great ways to track your spending to the penny and give you really, really good data to make good budgeting decisions. Now, if you're wondering why I'm writing so hard to have a legitimate budgeting app track your spending, it's because before I started Modern Wealth, I worked at two of the largest financial firms in the world as a financial planner. And at those firms, they didn't have anything like that for our clients. We would ask clients how much they would spend every month, and if they weren't sure, we just gave them a spreadsheet to figure it out. And when I started Modern Wealth, one of the first things I wanted to implement was a legitimate app to track expenses. And what I found was almost everyone was underestimating how much they were spending on a monthly basis. And in some cases, spending figures were way off. I had people telling me they were spending, $5K a month. And once we started to sync up their budgeting data, we found out that they were actually spending more like $8K a month, and they had no idea. So the moral of the story is you need to have a legitimate way of tracking every dime that you spend. Because when people get raises, this is where the risk of lifestyle creep comes into play. You go from making, let's say, $200K as a household to $300K, and your expenses start to creep up out of nowhere. But the only way you'll truly know if you are a victim of lifestyle creep is if you have baseline spending numbers to compare them to and a legitimate way to track it. Now, am I saying that just because you get a raise, it doesn't warrant changing your budget? Of course not, right? You work hard for your money and you should enjoy the fruits of your labor. However, the decision for how much to increase your spending, where that extra money goes, etc., is the decision that's going to be highly linked to what we discussed earlier, and that is your financial goals and objectives. And the budget is just one piece of that. Finally, after getting a raise, it's critical to review your investment strategy. One common theme that I see with high-income professionals is their retirement accounts are generally invested in assets that are positioned for long-term growth, like stocks. But their non-retirement accounts are often woefully under-optimized. Generally, this is where I start to see people stuffing excess money into a savings account and then maybe taking a little bit of that money and playing with some random individual stocks or, a couple ETFs here and there. But for the most part, most of their excess cash is just piling up for no rhyme or reason in a savings account of some sort. And when I ask these folks, hey, what's the reason for all this extra money piling up? They usually don't have an answer. They're like, hey, I don't know. I just put it in there because don't know what to do with it. So if this sounds like you, review your investment strategy. It doesn't mean you need to invest all in stocks. Maybe you actually invest in more conservative investments like treasuries, for example. But bottom line is you need to review how that money is being allocated and invested in accordance to those non-retirement oriented objectives and goals that you set out for yourself. Otherwise, having excessive cash that's just sitting there for no rhyme or reason is going to be a really big drag on your wealth growth long term. As a reminder, everything on today's podcast was general education only and not deemed to be specific investment, tax, or legal advice. If you need specific guidance, you can reach out to us at www.modernwealth.com. That's modern spelled with no vowels, wealth.com. It's been a lot of fun, guys, and I'll see you next time.